All right, so here we are today with Jim Thatcher, French horn player, who you've probably heard on a million movie scores. So welcome, Jim.
Welcome. Thank you.
All right, so how did you end up in Hollywood? Give us a little background on your early French horn studies and then what sort of brought you into the studios.
Well, I first started playing the French horn professionally when I was about 16. I had an uncle who was principal horn of the National Symphony of Mexico. And my parents sent me down there to get away from a girlfriend. And so I started to study with him. And
In Mexico?
In Mexico.
Okay.
And spent the summer with him and with the professional orchestras down there, and it just changed my life. I really got a taste for the life of the professional, so I decided that's what I was going to be. So after that, I worked with the Utah Symphony, the Phoenix Symphony, and then I came back home to Los Angeles, which is where I was born and raised, and auditioned for a group called the Municipal Arts Orchestra of Los Angeles. And they were looking for things like French horn, washboard, trombone. It was a very interesting group. Anyway, I went and auditioned for it at City Hall, at the very top building, and won the audition, and started to do concerts there. And we'd play for all sorts of different venues, parks and old folks' homes and concerts. And while I was doing that, the word of mouth was beginning to spread. Other musicians would tell people outside what we did about my horn playing. And so I went from there. I started to do operas and ballets, and then was brought into the Los Angeles Philharmonic and played with them for about 4 years. But as I had been working with them, I also had cultivated a freelance business starting too. So as far as the recording industry, I have Vincent DeRosa to thank for that. He was my horn teacher, mentor. I really wanted to know a lot about him, even though I'd already been playing professionally, because I'd never heard horn playing like that anywhere on the planet. And so he very generously and kindly took me in and began to teach me. And then our friendship grew, and so he began to recommend me for recording jobs. And then it's just like anything, I guess I'd call myself a musical plumber. You need a job, need a gig, call Jim, that sort of thing, And so little by little, word of mouth kept spreading here and there. And then started to do a lot of television shows. Working in the sections with Vince and with Richard Parisi.
So what sort of TV shows were these?
Oh boy, this is really dates me. We're talking Dynasty, Dallas, Knots Landing, Falcon Crest, things like that. Big horn things though. Bill Conti would come in and write the main theme to these things, and then great writers like Pete Myers and Ron Grant. Lance Rubin.
So how many horns would they have on a typical TV session back then?
Generally, we had 3 horns.
Okay, and how many sessions were going on a week for just the TV?
Oh, just for television, we'd probably do 4 or 5 sessions a week. And on any given day, there were probably 30 French horn players working.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it was just lots of. Universal had all the Mike Postpiece Carpenter jobs, and there were horn players working for that. Of course, then we had, you had Motown, you had not video games, but you had records. Yeah, records and television, and of course the motion pictures, that was kind of the upper level work.
And was it different guys working in different scenes?
Yeah, horn-wise, no. We spread ourselves out pretty much through the different genres, but as far as trombones and trumpets and strings, there were the motion picture guys, there were the jingle guys,
right?
The record date guys. There were different groups.
So playing as a commercial horn player in the studios, was that something you had wanted to do from younger, or is that
it actually was? It was one
later?
of the things. Even though I'd had an extensive orchestral career at this time, I remember when I was 13 years old going into the Warner Cinerama down on Hollywood Boulevard and watching How the West Was Won, which started out with this huge horn section with Mr. DeRosa. Jack Cave with another great horn player, and I just was stunned. And so I think that's where the initial seed was planted, was back then.
That's what you wanted to do.
It was one of the things I wanted to do. Yes.
And so then when did you go, okay, I'm not going to do the LA Phil or those other gigs? When did you get to being just solely studio horn?
I was the Los Angeles Philharmonic was going to have an audition for the principal horn, and I was thinking of taking the audition, and I was having lunch with a flute player, Jim Walker, who was sort of a mentor to me, and he looked at me and said, you know, all orchestras are the same. You've got a really good thing going here. And I thought about it. I said, you know, you're probably right. And so that's when I, really dedicated myself to primarily doing commercial work, although I still have always kept my hand in the classical venue, Pacific Symphony, Pasadena. Now I do Pasadena New West, Glendale Symphony, because of my background in that and the love that I have for the great orchestral works through the ages.
So do you remember what your first session was?
Yes. I don't remember the name, but it was a TV movie. Fred Karlin was the composer. Gail Robinson and Brian O'Connor and I were the horns. Gail was principal horn. And the only thing I remember is that a bus got hit by a train and the gal lost her arm or her leg.
Sounds typical movie of the week.
Typical movie of the week. But that was my first session.
And the husband was having an affair.
Could have been.
With the best
Could have
friend.
been. Although it wasn't Dallas, but who knows.
So you must have done like thousands of sessions now, obviously.
Yeah, close to 3,000 movies, and I don't know how many TV shows, and it's been.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
What's some of the craziest experiences? Maybe like the most number of horns you've seen on a session.
We did a movie called Soldier with Joel McNeely. We had 18 French horns, 20 trumpets, 20 trombones, 10 tubas, euphoniums, and we all did it over at Sony, which was called MGM back then, and just filled the room with nothing but brass players. It was wild. It was a lot of fun.
So that's the most. What's the craziest though? Well, that was pretty crazy, I guess.
Well, no, that was well written, so it wasn't really crazy, but it was just amazing to see that many brass players in there. When you say crazy, I probably working for a composer who perhaps played something on his keyboard or her keyboard, saying, well, that would sound good on the horn, and then you show up and you find it's like an octave out of your range. Occasionally those things happen.
Yeah, but that's the I guess that's one of the essential skills of a studio player, is being able to adapt.
Adapting is the big. I think of it. Our pencils are probably as important to us as our instruments.
So on that subject, what would you say, as a horn player, some of the big differences between playing a studio or playing a real orchestra?
Well, that just depends on who the composer is. If you get someone like a John Williams, that's very similar to playing in a big orchestra. Nowadays, we have guys who are married to their temp tracks, and so we'll come in and they'll actually want it to sound like their computer, or they'll stripe it where it's just we're playing alone. And so it takes a different type of playing. It's not quite so collaborative with other musicians, although it needs to be. But generally, the other musicians play during the day, and we're playing at night, and so I have to ask for extra volume in my headphones so I can get a feeling for what they did during the daytime.
Yeah, it's a challenge to
sit
way, with them.
But still, the way we're playing, I use fingerings that are different now because they're a little more direct in the way that things are mic'd, and where people are trying to more sound design than actually compose at times. We give him a certain horn sound that might match their temp track or fit in with whatever they want to do during the day.
It has changed over the years, the way
yes,
you've had to play
it has changed,
with
yes.
certain styles.
With certain, but then every now and then you come back to more of a standard orchestral sound, and we just finished a film with Marco Beltrami, which was quite orchestral, and we were all very familiar with it, and had 3 or 4 really great days. And there are other composers like that too. Yeah.
And what would you say the ideal size section is then? Obviously, we get 8 a lot, and we get 6 a lot, and we get 4. Or TV, it's less. But just for let's just say.
Oh, it's got to be 20 French horns.
20
Are you
French
kidding?
horns,
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I'd say I like 6 horns.
Yeah, I mean, I like 6 because we can have a 3-note chord with 2 on each.
Exactly.
And that gives a nice shine to the sound.
I think so too, and there's enough depth there, and you also find If you do need to make some adjustments or balance changes, you've got enough people to pull that off. Let's say there's a chord where maybe the bottom note is getting lost, and perhaps the way it's being mic'd that day, the upper note is really prevalent. Well, I can take one person off that upper note and just play it myself, and add a person down low, and still make it balance really well that way.
And so you find yourself making those sorts of little tweaks as you go along?
Yeah, quite frequently we do that. Yes, yeah, as needed.
Yeah, I find that's a big thing with being in the studio, is being able to do that on the fly.
Yeah, it has to be done quickly. There's a lot of money at stake here, so it really pays to know.
And no one wants to know that you did it.
No.
Because you just want to make it work.
Want to make it work. When the day's done, that sounds great, and we're under budget.